I want to remind you that if you're watching on YouTube, click that thumbs up. Just takes a second of your day. Give us that thumbs up. More thumbs up means more eyeballs. Comment as well. Do you agree or disagree with what I talk about during this podcast? Throw in those comments and subscribe. Trying to hit 1,000 subscriptions by the end of this month. So we're looking pretty good. We're about 100 away. Need a final push. And of course, I thank you for all of your support. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Pods, rate and review. All right, the question today is whether or not Bill Belichick is starting to figure this team out. Is he starting to figure out the 2023 Patriots and what they need to do to be successful? Before we get to that, though, and some other things, including Celtics thoughts from the opener last night, an update on Tyreek Hill, and this is gigantic for this weekend. Hill did not practice yesterday, and obviously without Tyreek Hill, that changes the landscape of this matchup. No Tyreek Hill, this is a completely different Miami offense if that is what they have to deal with. If you heard from Tua Tagovailoa yesterday at the podium, did not sound too confident or optimistic that Hill would be out there. He's dealing with a hip, so we have to keep an eye on that because no Tyreek Hill means a much, much better shot at winning this game for the Patriots on Sunday. I have lots of thoughts about this game coming up tomorrow. As we always do, we'll break it down. Again, the Nick Cattle Show, tomorrow's episode, Patriots, Dolphins preview, and any breaking news. All right, let's get to Bill Belichick. Is he starting to figure this team out? This edition of your New England Patriots, 2023, is Belichick starting to figure out what this team is, who they need to be to win football games? You know, the old saying that we always used to throw out there was, wait until Thanksgiving. Belichick looks at his team, he evaluates his team, he puts the pieces together, and then by Thanksgiving, they're a different team. They're winning football games, and they're ready for the home stretch. That was the old adage. Recently, that hasn't been the case. When you look at what this team has done recently after Thanksgiving, they haven't been very good. So that has all kind of changed the idea of slowly but surely formulating a plan and putting it together by the last third or so of the season to be clicking on all cylinders at that point. It's been different. It's been different the last few years. Like a lot of things have been different since Tom Brady left this football team. It hasn't been good post-Thanksgiving, but is Belichick starting to figure this team out, and are they starting to get closer to what they're going to be, and could they actually be much better by Thanksgiving than we ever thought they would be going back a week and a half ago? And the reason why I asked that is because last week we saw some changes. We saw some significant changes to the plan for the Patriots on both sides of the field. When you look at offensively what they did, more snaps as the number one for Kendrick Bourne. He was clearly the number one guy when you look at snap percentages, and that is a stark difference between what we've seen the last year plus with him. Pop Douglas had the second most snaps at wide receiver last week. That is a much different approach. Now, the $1 million question is, and we'll get to this in a little bit, was that because Juju Smith-Schuster was out? I think that could explain some of it. But the fact is, Devontae Parker was healthy, Devontae Parker was active, and his snaps took a significant hit last weekend compared to what he was doing through the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season. And those snaps went to Bourne, some snaps went to Douglas, some snaps went to Jalen Reagor. We'll get to him in a minute. So there was a change with the wide receiver rotation, and I was here for it. Love to see it. That was one change. Another change, Mike Onwenu sliding to right tackle from right guard. It's something that Belichick has said in the past that he wasn't going to do, did not want to do. He would consistently call Onwenu a guard when he was asked about possibly sliding him to right tackle. Last week, that changed. Last week, Sidney So, right guard, Onwenu, right tackle. That was a change within the approach. That was a change within the offensive line rotation and the starting big guys up front. Defensively, now, they've been aggressive all year long, really, for the last 4 or 5 weeks especially. You go back to Miami's game, they weren't aggressive. We talked about that. They laid back. They played it safe. They were willing to give up some plays underneath. They just did not want to give up the big plays. But aside from that game, this defense has been very aggressive. However, against the Bills, which we discussed before that game, they had not been aggressive. They had laid back. They had approached the Bills over the last 5 or 6 games and Josh Allen very much like they approached Tua Tagovailoa and the Dolphins week 2 of this year. Passive. Well, we saw that change last weekend. They were much more aggressive. Man blitzes. They blitzed almost 50% of the time. They got tons of pressure on Allen up the middle. So another change to what Belichick has done with this team in the past. So we're starting to see some evolution here from the head coach, which I love to see. Offensively, not only did you look at the wide receivers and their snap percentages and that change, and the offensive line and that change, but also how the offense was run was different. A lot more motion, almost 73% of the time, pre-snap motion from Bill O'Brien. You saw more play action. You saw more quick hit passes, more involvement of Pop Douglas, and relying on guys like Douglas and Bourne to give you some yak. That game plan against the Bills was much more comfortable for Mac Jones than any other that we had seen this year. Change, evolution, starting to figure things out. Is what we're seeing last weekend heading into this weekend? Is Bill Belichick starting to figure out this Patriots team? Today, Jalen Reagor was signed to the roster. I find this to be some pretty interesting news. Now, Reagor had been elevated 3 times, so the Patriots had to figure out whether or not they wanted to make him an active member or keep him on the practice squad, and they decided that, hey, we want to play him this weekend. We are going to activate him again. We are going to sign him to the 53-man roster. And the reason why this is an interesting development is that this is commitment to Jalen Reagor. And if you're committing to Jalen Reagor, that means you're not committing to somebody else. And that means further evolution from the head coach. Reagor played, I think, more than 20 snaps last week. More involvement from him than we had seen. So not only did you have Bourne and Douglas taking the most snaps at wide receiver, you had Reagor inching closer to Devontae Parker. Should we expect that to happen again this weekend? I'm not sure. But Reagor getting signed to the active roster, I do think that means that this evolving offensive game plan in what they see from their receivers, they're starting to map out certain things. And they're starting to realize that certain players might not be best to help with this operation. And so Reagor, he's activated to the roster. He is signed to the roster. He is going to play on Sunday. Does that mean Tyquan Thornton is going to be out? He played 3 snaps against the Bills, which is ridiculous. It's rather obvious at this point that Tyquan Thornton has been a huge swing and a miss. Maybe eventually that will change. I'm not optimistic. We have seen nothing from him this year to tell us that that's going to change. So is Tyquan Thornton out of the mix? Could be. Could be. Are we going to see Devontae Parker's snaps continue to decrease? We could. And I think when you look at those 2 decisions, if Tyquan Thornton is inactive, if Devontae Parker continues to take less snaps, then we're actually seeing head coach Bill Belichick overcome GM Bill Belichick. If we start to see Reagor more than Parker, if we continue to see more of Bourne and Douglas, if we continue to see Onwenu at right tackle, if we start to see some of these personnel decisions that truly make us feel like it's best for the football team and not best for the GM to prove a point, then that is a big step forward. That is exactly what I hope we see. I hope we see Reagor continue to take some more snaps from Parker and push him. I hope we see more of Bourne and Douglas. I hope we see Onwenu stay at right tackle. Will they lay back on defense against the Dolphins on Sunday? Or will that be different like it was this past weekend? Now, the 5,000-pound elephant in the room is Juju Smith-Schuster. He was a full participant at practice. He looks like he's coming back. Will head coach Belichick do what's right? And what's right, I feel, and I believe that you feel this as well, what would be right is to not shove Juju down our throats against the Dolphins. If Juju's back out there playing 35, 40 snaps, we have a problem. Because that would be GM Belichick being stubborn, trying to prove that he paid the money for the right guy, and that he is going to die trying to make Juju work within this offense. What we've seen from Smith-Schuster is a guy that doesn't look healthy. He doesn't have the burst. He doesn't have a ton of confidence. Him and the quarterback are not on the same page. So if Juju gets plopped right back in on Sunday, playing 35, 40, 45 snaps, I'm going to have an issue with that. If he's out there playing 20 snaps, whatever, 15, 20 snaps, if there are certain packages and certain plays that you think Juju can run and he can help the team, 10, 15 snaps, whatever it is, okay, if it could be justified. But I want you to justify it, and I want him to justify it. Because I'm rolling into this game thinking, Bourne and Douglas, 1 and 2. Let the rest of the guys fight for the scraps. Will we see that? Will we see head coach Bill Belichick look at Juju Smith-Schuster and say, he has not done enough to continue to get those snaps. We are not going to play him as much. Or will we see GM Bill Belichick say, sorry, Coach Belichick, you got to take a seat and you got to calm down here a little bit. We're going to play some Juju because we paid Juju the money and we picked Juju over Jacoby Myers. It's going to be a very telling sign on Sunday whether or not Belichick is truly evolving with this specific team and this specific roster. If the head coach is truly starting to figure things out. If we get Parker for 35, 40 snaps and Smith-Schuster for 35, 40 snaps, I'm going to flip the table over in this room on Monday. And maybe you want to see that. Maybe you want to see me lose my mind. Fascinating on Sunday. Do we see further proof that Belichick is starting to figure out his 2023 roster and what makes them the best they can be? All right. I dug deeper into some Mac Jones, Tua Tagovailoa numbers and that comparison as we get ready for the two starting quarterbacks on Sunday. I'll share those results, and I'll tell you, whether you hate Mac, love Mac, whatever, whether you hate Tua, love Tua, whatever, you are going to be very surprised by these numbers. I was surprised by these numbers. They're pretty eerie. They're wild. We'll get to those in a minute, but first, rate and review if you're listening to Spotify and Apple Pods. If you're watching on YouTube, listening on YouTube, don't forget to click that thumbs up. Every thumbs up means an awful lot to us. 1 second of your busy day. I know you're very busy, but 1 second of that busy day, we have over 1,000 views on these videos for most of the time now, and we got like 150, 200 likes. Let's get that number up. If you're watching and liking it, give us that like. Also subscribe, trying to hit 1,000 subscriptions by the end of October. We're about 100 away. It would mean an awful lot to me and this community if we can continue to build up that number. All right, let's get to Mac versus Tua. Two starting quarterbacks on Sunday, obviously not going head-to-head. This is not a one-on-one basketball matchup. But I've said before, and this has been spoken about in other places with me in this show, maybe not getting the credit for pointing out how similar the situation is between Tua and Mac. And yes, we've always talked about Mac and Tua and how similar they are as quarterbacks. But we dug into it a little bit deeper going back a few weeks ago with the idea of Devontae Parker being the number one for both guys when they first start out and try to get going, and the defensive-minded coach and all of that. We got into all of that before. But what I wanted to do, because I'm very curious, folks. I'm a very curious guy. The curiosity gets the best of me sometimes. And so not only did I want to look at the circumstances that Mac and Tua have faced in the NFL, not only did I look at the similarities going back to their college careers, I wanted to dig deeper and take a look at the numbers and see really how similar these guys have been early in their career, especially before Mike McDaniel and Tyreek Hill landed in Miami to help Tua become a better quarterback. So these numbers are nuts. Let's look at the first 34 games from these two quarterbacks, okay? I'm not going to go game by game. Don't worry about it. But looking at the first 34 games, and I picked 34 games because that is where Mac was as far as career games when I decided to pull these numbers. So I pulled Mac's numbers throughout his NFL career. It was 34 games. So I matched up his 34 games with Tua's first 34 games. That makes sense? I hope so. I remind you that Tua, for 11 of these 34 games, so almost 1/3 of these games, Tua had McDaniel and Tyreek Hill. Keep that in mind. So what did these quarterbacks look like statistics-wise through their first 34 games? Tua's completion percentage was about 66%. Mac Jones's was 66.2%. Tua's yards, 7,471. Max yards, 7,546. Are you already picking up on this trend? Yards gained per attempt. Tua was 7.3. Mac was 6.94. Touchdowns, there's variance here. First 34 games of Tua's career, he threw 49 touchdowns. First 34 games of Mac's career, he threw 41 touchdowns. So 8 less touchdowns from Mac. Mac also had more interceptions. 26 interceptions to Tua's 20 interceptions. Passer rating. Tua's passer rating was 95.3. Mac's was 88.8. So, through the first 34 games of their careers, Tua was the better quarterback. Not by much, but he was the better quarterback. We have to remember that a third of those games, Tua had McDaniel and Tyreek Hill. Now, here's when it gets really, really weird. This is where it gets eerie. I decided to take a look back and say, what happens with this comparison if you look at Tua before McDaniel and Hill versus Mac Jones? So, Tua with McDaniel and Hill, you take those 11 games out from the 34, we have 23 games, okay? So these are the games that Tua had Brian Flores and Chad O'Shea, multiple offensive coordinators, no Tyreek Hill. That's this Tua. So that's 23 games. So what I did was I took those 23 games, and then I took Mac's first 23 games. And the results are bananas. This is going to maybe make your mind melt. Here are the stats comparing Tua without Mike McDaniel and Tyreek Hill to Mac Jones. And I remind you that Mac Jones, within these numbers, 6 of these 23 games, he had Matt Patricia and Joe Judge. Here are the numbers. First 23 games of their NFL careers before McDaniel and Hill went down to Miami. Tua, completion percentage, 66.2. Mac, 67.2. Close. Yards, Tua, 4,467. Mac, 4,941. How about yards gained per attempt? Remember, Tua had the advantage after the McDaniel and Hill experience. What's it look like now without McDaniel and Hill? Tua, yards gained per attempt, 6.59, Mac 7.17. How about touchdowns? Tua Tagovailoa, in his first 23 games of his NFL career, without McDaniel and Hill, threw 27 touchdowns. Mac Jones, in his first 23 games of his career, 6 of those with Patricia and Judge, threw 26 touchdowns. A single touchdown is the difference between these two guys, the first 23 games. Is that not just crazy? Interceptions. Mac had more interceptions, 20 interceptions. Tua had 15 picks. Passer rating. Tua, 88.8 without McDaniel and Hill. Mac Jones, 88.4. Similar quarterbacks from the same program, handled in similar ways earlier in their career. The results on the field, very similar, almost eerie. If I wrote those numbers down and I met you at a bar one night and I slid over that piece of paper with those numbers, I don't think you'd believe me. I don't think that you would believe me that those numbers are that close. It's that insane. So we've talked about the circumstances and the college and the skill set and all of that stuff. But when you look at the numbers, it really crystallizes the idea of how similar Mac and Tua were at the beginning of their careers and how Tua has taken off. And Mac, up until last week, he was going through some tough times. Some other takeaways. Miami learned. They learned after 23 games. They learned their lesson. They learned that they were wasting Tua Tagovailoa and that they needed dramatic change. And they made that dramatic change. The Patriots, meanwhile, they doubled down on their approach with Mac. They doubled down on how they were going to handle him as far as talent goes, right? The receivers, they doubled down on that. We'll see. The offensive line being healthier, playing better will certainly help Mac Jones. Bill O'Brien figuring things out offensively. We started to see that evolution last week. That is going to help Mac Jones. But the Patriots took 35, 36 games to start to figure those things out. Miami figured it out with Tua after 23 games. And we still don't know. We can't just run with Mac's game last week and say that's what he's going to look like for the rest of the year. We still don't know, with the weapons and all of that, how this is going to finish up for Mac. But the Miami Dolphins organization pivoted rather quickly. Patriots being very patient with the approach on how to handle Mac Jones. I'm not telling you that Mac would be producing every single week like Tua, but it would have been nice to see them give Mac Jones a better chance at starting to produce like Tua earlier in his career. I just found those numbers to be bananas. Hopefully you did too, and hopefully you enjoyed that. All right, I'll get to some takeaways from the Celtics game last night. And if you didn't check it out, you can check it out. Cattle's on Causeway did a live post-game podcast last night. It's on this channel. It's another separate podcast, Celtics exclusive content. We did a live interactive post-game pod last night. You can check out my reaction. We broke down the numbers, took some questions from you. We're going to do that selectively throughout this basketball season. Should be a lot of fun, so check that out. But I want to get to some thoughts from last night and also a comment from Wyc Grousbeck that really stood out to me, got my attention. First, don't forget, rate and review if you're listening on Spotify and Apple Pods. Watching on YouTube, give us that thumbs up. Take a second out of your day and give us that thumbs up. Comment. Love the comments. Go back and forth. Love reading what you guys think, whether you agree or disagree with my thoughts here. And subscribe. Trying to hit 1,000 subscriptions by the end of October. We're about 100 away. Help me get to that goal. All right, some takeaways from the Celtics game last night. First thing I thought of was what a gritty win. It wasn't pretty. It didn't meet expectations as far as what people are saying about this team. You know, many people thought that the Celtics could just roll the basketball out and blow teams out this season. This was a gritty win. This was a gritty win that I think will start to define the character of this team early in the season. The New York Knicks are not going to back down. They're going to fist fight you. They're going to throw haymakers. They're going to play you physical. They're not going to give up. Coach Tibbs does not give up. His teams don't give up. And the Knicks played the Celtics very, very well last year. So this was a tough challenge right out of the gates. Forget what we saw in the preseason. Preseason doesn't count. Preseason does not count. This was the first game that mattered with these guys playing together, going against the team that played all last year together, has that cohesion, understands what each guy is trying to do. Thibodeau has his program. They're mostly on a string. So this was going to be a very tough challenge. Vegas had this game, 3.5 points. Celtics were like 3.5 point favorites last night. Vegas didn't tell us that this was going to be a 10, 15, 20 point game. Vegas didn't expect an easy win for the Celtics. So I thought this was a gritty win, being able to close that game out. Celtics only gave up like 3 points in the final 3.5 minutes of that basketball game. Their defense showed up and showed out for most of the night, but especially late in that fourth quarter. So this was a gritty character kind of win. You had to find a way. You had to execute late in the game. And you did exactly that. So I like the idea of an early challenge game one. You play Miami tomorrow night. So now you have back-to-back challenges to start this season. Two teams that are defined by their toughness, by their physicality, by their desire, by their compete level. And so it's going to take a more talented Celtics team to match some of those other traits, some of those other characteristics to win these first two games of the season. Last night, they did not give up. They had a big-time run. It was 64-63 in the third quarter. They had an 18-10 run to close out that third quarter. Then they get down in the fourth, a major swing in momentum. They're down in this game, final minutes. They make a run. They close out the fourth quarter. They close out the game. If this is a team that can function and execute late in games, that is going to make such a big time difference. We have seen this team fail to do that consistently over the past several years. So I loved that kind of ugly, gritty win. Loved it. Game 1 into this season. Showed us some stuff early with this team. Next, Kristaps Porzingis. Holy crap, what a performance. Porzingis literally had the best Celtics debut in the history of the franchise. He was unbelievable. I mean, just offensively, we saw so many different things. We saw the rim run early on. We saw the unlimited range. We saw, some of the mid part of his offense. He did not post up, and that's even more enticing because we know he can post up. The numbers tell you that he's a highly efficient post-up offensive player. And so we haven't even seen that part of his game from last night. And he still was as good as he was offensively. The rebounding was there. Kristaps Porzingis was brilliant last night. I would argue he was your best player on the floor for all 48 from beginning to end on both ends of the floor. I thought he was your best player last night. And Tatum was great. But I thought Porzingis, because of the rim protection, because of the shots that he made and when he made them, I mean, it was an embarrassment of riches last night with Tatum and Porzingis. Tatum was great. Tatum making that early charge, game 1, sending a message. Are we going to see MVP Tatum? We saw MVP Tatum last night. We saw in the second half especially, which I loved, he started to get more aggressive. He started posting up. He started touching the paint. I think we're going to see more of that as this season progresses. But Porzingis, man, he was brilliant. He was brilliant offensively. He was brilliant defensively. Made the shot of the game with that 3 late in the game to push it up to a 3-point lead for the C's. Porzingis was tremendous. Tremendous. If he stays healthy, he's going to be such a huge part of this team and their success. And the best aspect of that last night was Jaylen Brown was non-existent, which we'll get to in a little while here. But you did not need Jaylen Brown last night. Think about the last few years. It was always coming down to Tatum and Brown, Tatum and Brown, Tatum and Brown. Last night, you could rely on Porzingis to be brilliant. You could rely on Porzingis and Tatum. Jaylen Brown was not having a good night. Well, now you have the option. The last few years, that option would have been Marcus Smart or Derek White or maybe Malcolm Brogdon if he's in the game, maybe Al Horford if he's making some shots. I mean, think about the upgrade that we're talking with the third option here, where Jaylen Brown is having a bad game. You don't even have to have him touch the basketball in the fourth quarter late because you've got Tatum and Porzingis that you can run offense through. You've got Holiday that you can run offense through. You've got Derek White. They ran a lot of offense through Derek White late in this game. You start to see the differences, the talent impact versus what this team was even a year ago. Saw it last night. Tatum's versatility, again, showed all 3 levels. He can score at all 3 levels. I want to see him near the bucket a little bit more this year. I think we will. Jrue Holiday. Some people saying Jrue Holiday wasn't good last night. Offensively, he wasn't great. Thought he took 2 or 3 bad shots. Turned the basketball over a couple of times. But what Jrue Holiday was last night was a ridiculous defensive force. His impact defensively cannot be overlooked. He played Julius Randle a bunch last night. Randle, when Holiday was defending him, shot 1 of 10. It's crazy. Julius Randle, a legit 4 in the NBA, 1 for 10 against Holiday's defense. Holiday shut him down. How about Jalen Brunson? Brunson last night against Holiday, 0 for 4 from the field. How about RJ Barrett? 1 for 4. Just think about that defensive versatility from Holiday and what he showed you last night. This is why he is considered the best perimeter defender in the league. His versatility, his frame, his physicality, his hands, fighting through screens and navigating them. If you have a point guard, quote unquote, that can defend Randle and force him to shoot 1 of 10 and then defend one of the better point guards in the league in Brunson and force him to go 0 for 4 and then defend a wing like R.J. Barrett and force him to go 1 for 4. I mean, combined last night, Randall, Brunson, and Barrett, the 3 best players for the Knicks. The Knicks' 3 best players last night, when defended by Drew Holiday, shot a combined 2 of 18 from the floor. He also had a big rebound late. Meanwhile, Jaylen Brown has struggled. I've been talking about whether or not he's going to be able to fit within this offense with all of these other players. He has to try to figure out how he does fit because it was clunky again last night. And his clunkiness and his non-existence for long stretches, it impacted his shot selection, which wasn't very good. He turned the ball over a couple of times. And then again, we saw non-engaged, somebody said it in the chat last night, brain fog. We saw Jaylen Brown brain fog last night defensively, leaving shooters to double guys that should not be doubled, fouling a three-point shooter in the corner. We start to see some of those things. I thought Jaylen was bad last night, but overall, good win for the C's. Finally, just want to mention this Wyc Grousbeck comment that he made on the Greg Hill show this week, talking about last year and what happened at the end of the season. He said to Greg Hill and the rest of those guys, Wiggy and Chris Curtis, and of course, Courtney, Wyc said, I sat there the whole second half of Game 7 against Miami and started thinking about making changes. Then I took 2 days to think about it and went and met with Brad Stevens and Joe Mazzulla and said, we are not bringing back the same team. Look, Wyc's been great. He has been great on the balance of his ownership. He is spending tons of money for this team this year. I know he badly wants to win. That is obvious, but I did not like this comment. I didn't like this comment. I did not like this comment publicly to a radio show. And we had the story last year where Wyc walked into the locker room. I think it was after the Celtics got down 3-0 to Miami. And he walked into the locker room and it started, kind of giving it to the guys. That's a little too Jerry Jones for me. It's a little too much meddling for me. I don't like my owners getting involved unless it's absolutely necessary. And I don't think it was absolutely necessary to walk into the locker room during a playoff series and start yelling at the guy, like giving it to the guys. And people might say, oh, they changed and they played well in like the next 3 games. It wasn't because Wyc Grousbeck. I promise you that. Again, he's been a great owner. I love Wyc, but I don't like walking into the locker room during a playoff series and trying to tell the guys what they need to do better. That's for the coaching staff. That's for themselves to figure out. And I don't like this comment to Greg Hill this week. Like, let your staff do their job. Let your front office do their job, especially with how well the front office has done since Brad Stevens took over. I mean, Stevens has been great in his role. I don't like this idea of the owner pulling the head coach and the president of basketball operations aside and telling them, we're not bringing this team back. Like, let your guys figure it out. They've done a tremendous job in that front office. They have consistently brought in big player after big player. They've made significant change after significant change. And it's like Wyc is almost giving himself some credit here. Like the moves that happened, the Porzingis trade and the Drew Holiday trade, it's almost like from the owner, oh, well, I sat down Brad and Joe and I told them we need to make some moves. Was Brad going to make these moves anyway? What's Brad's track record? Brad's track record says he's very aggressive and he makes big moves and he makes tough decisions. It just came across to me as the owner taking credit for some of these changes that were made over the offseason. Like, give the credit to the front office. Give the credit to the guys that are making these moves. Didn't like it. And now you're left with questions, right? Did Brad want to make these moves? Did Brad want to trade Marcus Smart? Did Brad want this much change? Did he want to do that? Did he do that because he thought it was right? Or did he do that because the owner told him to do that? That's why you just don't say these things when you're Wyc Grousbeck. Like, let the people do their jobs. Give the credit to the people that do their jobs. You know, the narrative of Marcus and Joe Mazzulla weren't necessarily best friends. And maybe Joe wanted Marcus out. Maybe Joe wanted Grant Williams out. Maybe. But because of what Wyc said, maybe you're thinking now, well, maybe Joe didn't want those guys out. Maybe his hand was forced. I just thought it was unnecessary. Again, great owner, has done a great job, but say less. Say less. Give the flowers to your staff and just move on. We don't need to know these anecdotes about you walking into the room, slinging the door open and saying, "We need change." We don't need that. We don't need you barging into the locker room right after a postseason game. We don't need that. You hire people to do certain jobs, let them do those jobs. All right. We'll be back tomorrow. Dive into this Miami Dolphins, New England Patriots game on Sunday coming up. Can the Patriots carry the momentum from last weekend against Buffalo into this weekend down in Miami? We'll talk about that and much more. Until then, be well. It's the Nick Cattle Show.